Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Zevachim Daf Samech Vav. We're starting about 10 lines from the bottom on Samech Hey Amud Beis. And we'll see how far we get, either to the Mishnah or to the Gemara on the top of Samech Zayin Amud Aleph. Yesterday we were having a conversation about a Chata Sa'of, and one of the ideas that came up in a possible machlokes between our Mishnah and a Mishnah that is quoted in the name of Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon. We weren't sure exactly how to navigate that, and the Gemara had given a particular answer from the Plukta of Reb Zeir and Reb Shmuel about the possibility of whether or not rov basar of the neck had to be cut. So says the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom, on Samech Hamid Beis, Michlal, what's implied from here, from one of these shitas, either the shita of Reb Zera or Reb Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, where one of them said that rov basar me'akev ika beinaihu, that implies that when doing the process of malika, that implies that there was a rov that you had to cut through the neck. So says the Gemara, Michlal dibin a rov basar betchila, is that really true? Says the Gemara, our Gemara says v'hatanya. And if it were to be v'hatanya, it would be a v'hatanya benichusa, but it actually seems to not be that way. It actually seems to be ditanya, which is the appropriate girsa. So ditanya, where do we see a proof that rov of the neck had to be cut? Not just the functional parts of the kana and veshet, but let's call it 51% of the girth of the neck needed to be cut. Says the Gemara, Ketzad Mulkin Chata Sa'of. How did you do malika with the Chata Sa'of? So says the Gemara, bottom of Samech Hamid Beis, 8 lines from the bottom. Chotech Shedro Mafrekes. You cut the spinal cord and you break it. Below Rov Basar. At this point, it's just without 51% of the neck. Ad Shemagia Leveshet O Lakana, until you get to one of the two simanim. Then, when you get to the other siman, Higia Leveshet O Lakana, then Chotech Siman Echad O Rubo. You cut one or most of it, and Virov Basar Imo. So what we see from this brisa is that cutting rov of the veshet, cutting rov of the neck, is actually a thing. So we ask the question curiously, and the Gemara says, no, it's real. That's really the real deal, that we in fact have such an obligation. Ube'ola, all that was by a chata sof. Ube'ola, when we're talking about an ola, shnayim, you have to cut two o ro shnayim, either most of two or two whole. That's really not part of our conversation. It's just the end of the brisa. But we see from here that there is such a principle that by a chata sa'of, that one is obligated to cut the majority of the girth of the neck, 51%. Now, do we measure this in volume of the circumference? If you were to just do a cross section of the neck, you have to do 51%. Is it just the depth of the neck? Like, how do we measure this? I have no idea, but it has to be 51%. Obviously, when it comes to shchita, we're very strict on these things. We don't mess around. The halach is rov kana and rov vesha. We cut through everything. We don't want any sveikos of trefos. You don't want to be in the 51%. If you're measuring, you did something wrong. You should not be measuring. It should be very clear that the animal was shechted properly. Anyways, the Gemara now says a few lines from the bottom on Samech Hamid Beis, Amruha Kame de Reb Yirmiyah. All the questions and answers from above. Remember that we had our Mishnah, which had one din about a chata sa'of, and then we had the shita of Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon in a brisa 4 lines down, where he also spoke about chata sa'of, and the machlokes was whether or not we were mavdil the neck. Our Mishnah from yesterday said that we were not mavdil the chata sa'of. Reb Shimon ben Lazar said we were. We gave a bunch of answers in the Gemara, one from Rav Chizda, one from Rava, and one from Abaye. And all of these answers were presented to Rav Yirmiyah in order to try to clarify the machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon. But Rav Yirmiyah wasn't having it. He didn't agree to any of this. Omar, he said, Lo shmiyalahu, did they not hear? Ha de Amar Reb Shimon ben El Yakim, Mishum Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas, Mishum Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua. Didn't they learn Chumash? Didn't they learn Brisas? Didn't they learn Torah? After all, Omer Haya Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon, same person. What did Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon say? Not that you're obligated to be mavdil. Shamati b'chata sa'of shemavdilin. Yes, he says mavdilin, but what does that mean? Umay lo yavdil, but the pasuk says lo yavdil. So how could Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon say mavdilin if the pasuk says lo yavdil? What's the pasuk? A pasuk in Vayikra Heiches. The pasuk says vehevi osam el hakohen vehikriv es asher lachatas rishono malakes rashom imul arpo velo yavdil. So state in Chumash, you're not allowed to be mavdil. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says mavdilin. So do we take off the neck? Do we take off the head of the animal, or do we not take off the head of the animal? Says the Gemara, my lo yavdil. What does the pasuk mean? Ein tzarich lehavdil. So this is how Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon can be understood in this brisa, and it makes us re-understand the Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon at the top of Samach Hamid Beis. So what we had initially presented as a machlokes between our author of the Mishnah, our Tanakama, and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon is actually not a machlokes at all. Our Mishnah said, lo mavdil, you should not cut. What did Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon say? Mavdilin, but you really don't need to. You should, but you don't need to. So they're not as far apart, and therefore we're not in need of any of those answers. Says the Gemara, that's not so pashut. How can you say that when the pasuk says lo yavdil, that you should not separate, that it means you don't need to separate? How can you say that? After all, Amar le top of Samach Vav Amud Aleph, heading toward the end of the parak. Amar le Rav Acha beredu Rava le Rav Ashi. Elameata. If the way that you're learning the pasuk of lo yavdil is ein tzarich lahavdil, isn't that so opposite? Lo yavdil, don't separate them. How do we darshan? You don't need to separate. Those are opposites. If you're going to say that that's a normal drasha of how to learn the word lo yavdil, then elameata gabe bor. What about by a bor? If a person was irresponsible and didn't cover, hachanami de'ein sarich lechasos, you get to interpret every lo saseh Torah as lo tzarich? It can't be. It can't be. How are you understanding Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon in that way? Says the Gemara, hachi hashta. Well, what kind of strange comparison is that? Hasam in regards to the case of the boar. We're going back to Nezikin. Awesome. In regards to the case of the boar, there we're talking about Nezikin, we're talking about Mamanis. Obviously, obviously over there, the pasuk means you have to cover it. That's obvious. You have to look at the context, right? We said that velo yavdil means velo tzarech sheyavdil. That's what we said. What about by boar? It's apples and oranges. You got to look at the context. When it comes to Nezikin, to someone falling in, obviously v'lo yachasenu means that if you don't cover it, you're going to pay for it. That's obviously what it means. Aval hacha, in our case, when it says v'lo yavdil and we darshan of ein tzarech lahavdil, michti, we have no choice but to learn it that way. Because after all, ksiv v'hi krivo, we have a pasuk in Chumash that says v'hi krivo. That's the beginning of a pasuk we started with a couple of days ago. V'hi krivo hakohen al mizbech u'malakes rosho v'iktar mizbech v'nimtza adoma al kir mizbech. Some of the basic dinim of chatas ha'of. It says the Gemara, chilek hakasu ben chatas ha'of le'olas ha'of. Says the Gemara, there's a difference between a chatas ha'of, where we're not mavdil the neck, and the olas ha'of, where we are. So lo yavdil lamali. What then do we use lo yavdil for? Shma mina, that ein sarach lahavdil, because we need there to be a difference between the chatas ha'of and the olas ha'of. Elamai. It must be that we say v'lo yavdil means that you're not obligated to, but by the olah you are obligated to, and that's how we understand the pasuk. Says the Gemara on Samach Vav Amud Aleph, 5 lines before the end of the parak, Mitza dam haguf. We said that when it comes to the chatas ha'of, first you cut the neck, keep the head connected. You got this grip. You motion toward the mizbeach, and blood will spurt from the animal that was just shechted. That's your zrika. Afterward, you take the animal and you're mamatza on the mizbeach. So remember where we're standing, southeast corner, right? Because that was the closest shot to where we throw the crop and the feathers, and the Trumas Hadeshin goes there as well. So let's see what's going on over here. Tana Rabban and Ola. This pasuk reads, "V'shisa oso bechnafav lo yavdil v'ktiro so hakohen mizbecha al ha'etzim asher la'esh olahu." That this is going to be an ola. Afal pisha mitza dam haguf lo mitza dam harosh. Even if you only did mitza, you only squeezed out blood from the body and not from the head. Yachol mitza dam harosh v'lo mitza dam haguf. What if the only type of blood that you squeezed out was from the head and not from the body? Does that work? No, it does not. In order to do mitzvah properly, it has to come from the body and not from the severed head. Talmud Omar hu, My Talmuda, Amar Ravina Mistabra derov damim beguf shchichi. Most of the blood is obviously in the body. Hadron Allah Kache Kachim Baruch Hashem. We got to finish the 6th parak of Maseches Zevachim Yiratzon. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. The new Mishnah, halfway down on Samach Vav Amud Aleph, says as follows: Chatas ha'of she'asa'a lemata k'maisa chatas l'shem chatas kshera. What's our perfect petri dish sampling of doing the chatas ha'of? You're doing the chatas ha'of. You do it below the chut hasikra k'maisa chatas with all the appropriate actions of a chatas, and it's l'shem chatas. And your kavana, not just your actions, but your kavana is also l'shem chatas. Pashut that's kshera. That is perfect form of how to do a chatas ha'of. Let's talk about breaking some of the rules. Let's say that you're doing a chatas ha'of and you do it k'maisa ha'of. You do all the actions that are the same, but your kavana is l'shem ola. Okay, so I have a chatas ha'of. All my actions are correct. Remember some of the differences. We do zrika by chatas ha'of. We don't do zrika by ola ha'of. That's an example. So let's say all my actions were good, but my kavanas were not good. Or I do the chatas ha'of k'maisa ola, 3 lines into the Mishnah. All the actions I did for the chatas ha'of were like an ola ha'of, but I did it l'shem chatas. So says the Gemara, or k'maisa ola l'shem ola. Obviously, if you double down and you do everything wrong, you're bringing your chatas ha'of, but the mechanics are brought like an ola, and your kavana is like an ola. Pashut that all of that is going to be psula. So if we summarize this first part of the Mishnah in the new parak of parak chatas ha'of, what we're seeing is that the chatas ha'of is only kosher if you check off 2 boxes. You have to do all the maisim that are appropriate to be done for a chatas ha'of, and you have to have the right kavana. If you break any of those rules in any permutation, then the chatas ha'of is going to be psula. What about the next case? Asa lemala k'maisa kulan psula. What if the only thing you did wrong is you did it above the chut hasikra? The halacha is that it's possible. It needs to be done below the chut hasikra. Next part of the Mishnah. Remember, the first part of the Mishnah, we have the Reisha of the Mishnah that we just learned. Now we're going to learn the Seifa. That language will become helpful when we get to the Gemara. What about the Ola Sa'of? Let's say I'm bringing in Ola Sa'of, and I did it, She'asa lema'ala k'maisa ola, and I did the blood, the mitzah sadam, because there's no zrika sadam by the Ola, but I did it by the Ola Sa'of, and I did the blood above the chut hasikra like I should have done, k'maisa ola, and I did it l'shem ola, kshera. Again, perfect, uniform, you did it just right. The Ola Sa'of that was done above the chut hasikra, and it was done with the right kavana, good to go. However, 4 lines before the bottom of the page, if it's k'maisa ola, let's say I take the ola and I do it like it's supposed to be done, but I do it l'shem chatas. So now I take an ola sa'of and I treat it physically the right way. I don't do zrika sadam. I completely sever the head. All the things that we know are applicable to ola sa'of. Great, I did it right, but my kavana was bad. L'shem chatas, because I'm dealing with ola sa'of. You did l'shem chatas. Kshera. That's different. There we say that it's kosher. Ubilvad shelo alsa leba'ala. Yes, it's kosher, but no, it doesn't count. We saw this on the first blot of this Masechta. If you do an ola shelo b'kavana, it's kosher, but you're not yotze, whatever your goal was with that. What if you had your ola sa'of and you did it k'maisa chatas? The actions that you did with the ola sa'of, you physically treated it like a chatas, in that you didn't sever the head, in that you only cut one of the 2 siman, and whatever the malika was that was different, because it wasn't the same with all animals, but you did it l'shem ola, so you had 1 strike against you. Or you did it k'maisa chatas l'shem chatas, then psula. If you did the maisim of the chatas, and certainly if you do the maisim and the kavana, pashat that those 2 are psula. Asa lamata k'maisa kulam psula. And if you did the ola sa'of below the chut hasikra, also pasul. That is the end of our Mishnah. Turning to the top of Samach Vav Amud Beis, says the Gemara as follows. We said in our Mishnah in the Reisha that when it comes to the chatas ha'of, we said that if you deviate in how you treat the chatas ha'of and the physical actions that you do to the chatas over, like the ola, we said it's puzzle. So asks the Gemara, Deshani b'mai, when you did the chatas like an ola, what actions did you do to the chatas that were ola type of actions? Rashi, Akemai ola, the actions that you did that were ola like, and you did it l'shem chatas koi, umi boile, eze davar bechatas asa kemai ola. What did you do to that chatas, to that ola to that chatas ha'ov, that was an action that was shaykh only to an ola? So says the Gemara, Deshani b'mai, ilema deshani b'malika. If you want to say that the malika was different, Rashi shehiv deal, because the malika that we do by the ola is complete. If you want to say that what changed, I have my chata sa'of and I did it like an ola in that I severed the head, well, we don't like that answer because Neima delok Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon, we don't want our Mishnah to be at odds with any other Tanaim if we can avoid it. The Amar, he said, Shamati Shema Avdilan b'chata sa'of. According to Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon, as we've already seen today once, he holds that even by a chatas they sever the head. So if that's true, it can't be that the deviation in the reish of our Mishnah was that the malika was that of removing the head, because he holds that that's normally the case. So says the Gemara, V'lo ukimna delok Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon. Didn't we already discuss this? We already know that we're not like Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon, at least according to one shita. So the Gemara says, lo, that's actually not the right answer. That wasn't the deviation. The deviation of the chatas that was treated like an ola was a different deviation. The shani behaza. The chatas has two stages of sprinkling. Stage number one is right after the chitach. You sprinkle the animal, you swing the animal toward the mizbeach, blood goes onto the mizbeach. And then you do mitzas hadam. That's chatas ha'of. But by the olas ha'of, we don't do the first sprinkle. So if the Gemara says it's deshani behaza'ah, that the chatas that normally has a zrika is treated like an ola, and now it doesn't have a zrika, so says the Gemara, hachanami mistabra. That's actually very likely what our Mishnah was referring to. Why? Midikatani seifa. Because at the end of our Mishnah, what did we say? At the end of the Resha of our Mishnah, says the Gemara, Asa'a lemala kemaisa kulan, psula, ve'afilu kemaisa chatas, l'shem chatas. If a person takes an ola and he does the mitzvah above where he shouldn't have, so even if you did everything else right, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. So what does that show you? Must be that the deviation was zrika. Beautiful. So this answers the first question of our Gemara. What we wanted to know is when our Mishnah said that you had a chatas ha'of and you deviated and treated that chatas ha'of like an ola, what did you do to that oaf that was ola oriented and not chatas oriented? The answer is hazah, that you skipped the zrikas hadam part, because the chatas ha'of needs that, the ola ha'of doesn't. So if you take a chatas ha'of that needs zrika and you skip it, you're treating it like an ola. So that's what the Gemara says is automatically psula. Okay, deshani b'mai. Deshani b'mai, what was the deviation in that case? Ilema deshani b'malika. If you want to say that we were talking about malika, and maybe he did malika possibly in a different location. Ha'amar malika b'chol makam b'mizbech kshera, no. Elalav deshani behaza. So we can see from that brisa, from our Mishnah really, that we are talking about hazah. And therefore, says the Gemara, umi de seifa behaza, because that piece of the Mishnah is talking about hazah, reisha nami behaza. Perhaps we should make a tzushtel to the reisha of our Mishnah, that it's also talking about hazah, that the reisha and the sefer both talk. It says Gemara, no, midi area, hakadisa vakadisa. The different cases of the Mishnah could very well be talking about different deviations. And there's more deviations to be had. There isn't only one halacha that's different between a chatas sof and an ola sof. I can tell you two right now. One is how you do malika, and the other is in regards to above and below the chut hasikar. There's different halachos for each of them. So says the Gemara, what about the sefer of our Mishnah that speaks about olas ha'ov? It says the Gemara as follows, Deshani b'mai. In the sefer of our Mishnah, remember, the Reisha was talking about a chatas ha'of that you treated like an ola. Flip now. Now we're talking about an olas ha'of that you treat like a chatas. So says the Gemara, and we're right after the two dots, a quarter of the way down on Samech Vav Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Olas ha'of deshani b'mai. The case where you have an ola that you treated like a chatas, what was the deviation? Ilema deshani b'malika. If you want to say that the olas ha'of was being treated like a chatas, you took the ola and did something that you don't normally do, which is swing it toward the mizbeach and do zrika. We don't do that with an olas ha'of. We only do mitzah. Says the Gemara, midikatani seifa. If that's true, then I don't understand the seifa. And here the seifa is referring to the next Mishnah. We'll learn that tomorrow. So says the Gemara, what does it say in tomorrow's Mishnah? Kulan ein mitamin bebeis hablia umoalin bahen. We'll learn the details tomorrow, but basically it says over there that there's no tuma if you swallow it. Bebeis hablia. Tuma bebeis hablia means that you become tame when you swallow a food. But there's also a din of moalin bahen. Says the Gemara, if that's true, then nema delo Rabbi Yoshua. De'ik Rabbi Yoshua ha'amar ein moalin. That can't be that our Mishnah is going to be like Rabbi Yoshua, because the Mishnah on the bottom of Samech Vav Amud Beis says that there's Me'ila. Rabbi Yoshua says that in this particular case there would not be Me'ila, and therefore our Mishnah cannot be like Rabbi Yoshua. And therefore, the difference, the action that you did to the Olas Ha'of and treating it like the Chatas Ha'of can't be talking about Malika. So perhaps, says the Gemara, the Ela b'mitzui, maybe it's talking about sprinkling. This term is being used loosely because what it means is that the Olas Ha'of was treated like a Chatas in that he took the animal and he sprinkled it toward the Mizbech, which is normally not done with an Ola. If that's true, says the Gemara, Ema Seifa, we have a problem with another part of our Mishnah that's at the bottom of this page. What's that? So this is, again, that Mishnah at the bottom, which it starts two-thirds of the way down. What does it say there? Olas ha'of she'asa lemata k'maisa chatas l'shem chatas. Let's say I have an olas ha'of, and I do the mitzui hadam below the chut hasikra, like a chatas is done, and for the sake of a chatas. So there we have a problem, because it's a machlokes. Rebbe Lazar Omer mo'alin ba, Rabbi Yoshua Omer ein mo'alin ba. If you want to say that this is about mitzui, so then we have to understand this machlokes. The shani b'mai. What in this brisa, in this Mishnah, I should say, when it says olas ha'ov she'asa lamata, the machlokes Rebbe Lazar and Rabbi Yoshua, the shani b'mai. What was that case? Ilema b'mitzui. Eimar dam Rabbi Yeshua deshani b'malika b'mitzui mi Omar. Rabbi Yeshua is only talking about malika. He wasn't talking about mitzui. So you can't say that that's the action that's different. Ve'ela b'malika. If you are talking about malika, like Rabbi Yeshua says, reisha v'seifa b'malika u'metziyasa b'mitzui, then the way that we would have to unpack the two Mishnayos, the one we started with and the one that we'll learn tomorrow, the one that we're almost up to, is that the first case and the third case are talking about Malika, and the middle case is talking about Mitzui. That's not a clean way to learn the Mishnah. So the Gemara is bothered by that. However, the Gemara still concludes, and we'll wrap up with this. I'm okay with that, says the Gemara. Sometimes we don't have a choice but to learn a Mishnah in a difficult way. How are we learning this Mishnah? Reisha v'seifa b'malika, u'metziyasa b'mitzui. We have our Mishnah that we started with at the open of the parak. Our Mishnah at the bottom of Samech Vav Amud Beis, really, in some versions, they're actually taught together. And therefore, we have to learn this. Word therefore is not right. Because of how complex the Gemara is, we have no choice but to learn the Mishnah the way that we have it in three parts. 1 and 3 are talking about Malika, and the middle is talking about Mitzui. So the deviations that we have, in one case, the deviation from Ola to Chatas is one of these three options. The Reish and Seif is B'Malika, and the middle case is B'Mitzui. We'll stop right here. Emir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up with a new Mishnah and the rest of the Gemara, Daf Samach Zayin. We have a couple of short amudim coming up over the next couple of days. So Emir Hashem, our shiurim should be a little bit shorter. Wishing you all a beautiful night.